The topic of today's session is getting involved in local advocacy. I'll just say my experience as a professional advocate and a lobbyist has ranged from federal and state and local. And right now, primarily my time at Mentor National has been as a federal lobbyist, going to Capitol Hill, advocating for various funding streams and so on. But I'm transitioning a lot more of my time now to working more to help state level advocates across the country and local advocates because I think there's a lot of opportunity, especially for youth development and mentoring advocates across the country to make some really great things happen. We see a lot of opportunity there. In my own personal background of advocacy in my career and just life, I've advocated at all levels of government, including state government. We've gotten some bills passed over the years in the states I've lived in across the country, and made some initiatives happen at the local level too. I'm originally from Las Vegas and did my undergrad work at the University of Nevada in Reno, and I was a student body president there. So I had a lot of interactions with the city council and with the mayor's office, to push forward a number of initiatives. So I think I have a little bit of experience and some tips that I can share from my own personal experience, but also just best practices of advocacy kind of across the board. So with that, we'll get started and I'll just do an overview. And first of all, I'll start with this phrase that you've likely heard before, which is that all politics are local. And that phrase actually comes from a federal official. He was a former Speaker of the House. His name was Tip O'Neill from Massachusetts. And the reason why he said that was because it's really important for elected officials, no matter how high up they are in government, to be connected to their local communities. Local connections and relationships and skills are always required in order for them to continue to win their races, in order for them to avoid a primary from their own community that could potentially cause them to lose their seat. Remember, a big motivation for elected officials for a lot of the work that they do is that they want to be seen as a good community member, a good elected official, and someone that they want to continue to be, reelected and representing them in whatever governing body it is. But I think it's especially relevant here because when we're talking about local advocacy, the politics really are very, very hyper local. And we'll talk a little bit about what the local government does, some of the services that you see on a more day-to-day basis. But I'll just say that, when comparing to the federal government, the federal government are not the people who are picking up your trash every day or ensuring that, there's snow removal or doing code enforcement or, running the local health department. That is all your local government. And so local governments are really the folks who are touching your lives on a day-to-day basis the most. And thus they have a smaller amount of constituents. They represent the council people, the mayors represent a much smaller amount of people. And what that means for us as advocates is that your vote matters even more, which means that you have even more leverage as an advocate within your own community. These folks are going to be a lot more accessible to you, and you're much more likely to be able to, have a one-on-one coffee meeting with your local city council member than you are with your member of Congress, certainly. And so just know that it provides a lot more opportunity for you to make things happen in your community. And we'll talk about what some of those specific things could potentially be. So first of all, I'll just say that most advocacy principles remain the same no matter the level of government that you're advocating to. It doesn't matter if you're advocating to your senator from your state in the U.S. Senate, or if it's your hyper-local school board member or your city council person that represents your ward. Generally, you want to keep these kind of principles in mind when you are advocating to an elected official, no matter what stature they have or what level of government they're at. And some of those key things to keep in mind are to always have a specific ask and a clear goal in mind. So it's okay to go to a meeting with an elected official without a specific, like, I want you to change this policy, but you do want to approach them with a problem that you're facing within your community and ask them how they can support you. That is literally what their job is as an elected official representing you, is to help you solve these problems to enhance their community. And so you want to have a clear goal in mind with the meetings that you're having with the elected official, no matter who they are. Secondly, it's always important to discuss the impact or importance and the urgency of what you're advocating for the constituents in your community. For a mentoring advocate, that could look like a lot of different things. I think that it's no secret to all of us that young people have faced a number of struggles, in recent years, in particular, in the post-COVID sort of era. And I know that, and you all know that connection with mentors and relationships have never been more important. We've seen, incredible numbers, and the Surgeon General of the U.S. has even released reports about how Americans are facing unprecedented loneliness and isolation. And we know that mentoring can be a key way to address those issues and make for more connected and happy communities. And so, you always want to approach these conversations and meetings with elected officials ready to discuss why what you're talking about is important. And when possible, you want to include any data or research that you have when possible. It can be as broad as the impact of mentoring overall, or it can be program outcomes that you have from your own surveys that you've done, from your own programming. And so whatever that looks like for you, it's always helpful to have that information, if not, just ready to talk about, but a one pager or something like that the elected official can walk away with is always really helpful too. Communicate with a lens that will be appealing to their perspective and passions. This goes into, and I'll talk about this a little bit more, but always helpful to research the elected official that you're meeting with a little bit before you have that meeting. Understanding not only things like what committees they're on, but also just what their interests and passions are. What did they run on when they ran for that seat? What is their stance on, out of school time programs, on youth development? Is that a passion of theirs? That really helps you to identify who your champions can be. And you want to be able to communicate what you're advocating for in a lens that would appeal to them based off of their passion. So as an example, if they're really passionate about workforce development, we know that there are clear ties for mentoring and career exploration and workforce development. Make those really clear connections for them so they don't have to do it themselves. Is always a really great tip to keep in mind. Next, we always encourage people, of course, the data and research is important, but I think even more important is being able to connect with them on a human level. Have not an emotional appeal. I'm not saying bawl your eyes out to this elected official, but what I am saying is that you want to paint a story and get them to understand why what you're advocating for is important and will make a difference not only for you, but for the youth that you serve and for your community as a whole. So finding those stories of impact is always especially helpful to sort of paint your case. And then always, respond to what the opposition might have to say. It's always good to think ahead a little bit and think about what in opposition, a person opposed to what you're advocating for might have to say. Mentoring is one of those. No one's against mentoring, but people might be against, elected officials spending their time on something like mentoring. I don't know. I think that's silly, but it's always good to keep that in the back of your mind and think about ways that you can address that ahead of time during your meeting. All right. So now we're going to talk some specific local advocacy tips. I came up with 3 that I think are overarching and useful. And they are right here. So first of all, understanding your local government structure, so doing a little bit of research there. Secondly, taking the time to understand the officials' priorities. And third, identifying opportunities to speak and provide input, and then to actually act on those opportunities. So let's go through all 3. And first, talk about understanding your local government structure. So local governments generally take responsibility for this long list of different things here, ranging from parks and recreation services to police and fire departments, housing services, code enforcement, oftentimes public schools. This is not always the case. I'll say, like I said, I'm from Nevada. We have counties that are essentially, the school districts there. And so we have the Clark County School District, the Washoe County School District, and other places like Maryland. I know I did my grad work in Maryland. It's much more, public schools are much more controlled at the city or town level. So all this is to say is that it ranges quite a bit depending on where you live and depending on your state. Oftentimes it's determined by your state constitution. And so, I would encourage you to look a little bit more into what Washington's sort of structure is. But overall, these are the things that local governments take responsibility for. And you can kind of see that though mentoring isn't like perfectly within any of these categories, you can see it fitting in within some, not only public schools, but also within things like parks and recreation services. Very clear tie in there with out of school time, activities and mentoring programs and after school and so on. And so there are clear connections here. And certainly, we've seen mayors and communities across the country really rally around, youth mentoring. And we'll talk about what that's looked like in a couple of different ways. So there is no consistent structure across localities in terms of what a government structure looks like, which makes this oftentimes difficult and requires you to do a little bit of research. So even just like the term city or town or county or village That's going to differ depending on what state that you're in, how it's actually defined, and how many people are required to be within the city or the town for it to qualify as a town or a city or a county. It's going to completely depend. And so that's why it behooves all of us to do a little bit of that research. And we'll talk a little bit about how to do that. But in some, it's, really interesting. And again, it'll range. City councils, county councils, the leaders of it will have varying amounts of powers depending on how it's structured. So in some places, some cities, some towns, mayors are going to have a lot of sway over policy making, over budgeting, over administrative powers. And in other places, mayors have less power or actually no power at all. There are some cities I've found across the country where they actually elect the mayor among their city council and they elect it among themselves. And it's more of an administrative kind of thing rather than them actually having any real policy making power that's different than other city council members. Some counties will have an elected county executive. I know it's a big thing in Maryland. Counties in particular have a decent amount of power, county executives do, and it's elected by the people. But other times county executives are elected by the other people among the board, and it's more, again, of an administrative sort of thing. So going to completely depend. Doing that kind of research is going to help to identify for you what kinds of folks that you want to meet to. Am I going to want to spend more time trying to meet with the city or the town executive, the mayor or the county executive, or am I going to want to spend some more time developing relationships with city council people, some of those policymakers on the local council? But overall, typically, councils are typically going to approve what are called ordinances, which is another word essentially for a local law. And they're organized similarly to a state or a federal government. So a state or a federal government will have, at the federal government, it's called the U.S. Code. It's a million-plus page document of every law that Congress has ever passed and been signed into law. That is how the country runs. And states will have similar, Nevada, it's the revised statutes, and it's organized by subject. Cities are going to have the exact same thing. So when we're talking about like code violations and municipal courts and things like that, all that stuff is actually decided by your local government, by your city or town council, or your county council. And so, again, the job of the lawmaking body, which is the city council or the county council, is going to be to pass new laws to essentially determine how the government is run. All right. So again, just take the time to understand how the locality is structured and what they're responsible for. A really good place to start for that is just the jurisdiction's website. So if you're looking at the city, go to the city website. If you're looking at the county, go to the county website and just poke through it and see, what services they offer. What is the government overall in charge of? You don't want to spend your time looking for a Parks and Recreation department that doesn't actually exist within that government. And so doing that little bit of research is just going to save your time and save, the government officials' time as well. But understanding the services it offers and then who some of those decision makers are. So, knowing who your representative on the town or city council is always helpful. Similarly, you want to know who your mayor is. Good people to know who can help you advocate and move your priorities forward. And then, take time to look over documents such as the budget, I put that in bold, and the strategic plan or vision. The reason why I put the budget in bold in particular is because there is this saying, in politics in general, that the budget is where your priorities are. It is a priority document that shows you what you actually care about. And so at the city or town or county level, it's going to be a lot easier actually for you to understand the budget and to flip through it a little bit better because it's going to be a lot smaller than the federal budget. I'll tell you that much. My job is to analyze it every year or analyze pieces of it every year, because if I had to analyze the whole thing, that would be more than a full-time job. But all this is to say is that, the budget is accessible to you and you can look through the budget and understand really what the mayor and the city council folks' priorities are and what their strategic plan and vision is for the next 4, 5, 10 years moving forward. That helps you to better identify, in what way youth mentoring and youth development can really fit within what their priorities are, makes you your advocacy stronger in what you're asking for and what you're advocating for as well. So going to a meeting with a city council member and saying, I saw this in the budget, or I saw, that you want to do a lot more in the after school, out of school time space in the strategic vision or plan. Let me help you do that. Offering yourself as a resource is always a good way of approaching these kinds of conversations. Okay. So that is understanding the government structure. And now we're going to go to our second tip here, which is to take time to understand the officials' priorities. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but wanted to talk about some ways that you can actually do that. First of all, just following them on social media and subscribing to their e-newsletters is always really helpful. City and council folks, elected officials at that level, oftentimes, if they have staff, they will have very few. So all this is to say that the elected official has a lot of leeway into what their external communications actually look like. So they are oftentimes the ones who are posting on social media. They are oftentimes the ones who are releasing those e-newsletters talking about what they want to talk about. One way that you can think about this is that they have broad outreach to your community. So if you want to do some kind of a mentoring recruitment campaign, if you want to highlight your program within their e-newsletter, that is something that they would possibly be open to. And so I'm thinking about back to my time in Reno as well, when it was so easy to just like tweet at my mayor or to tweet at my, council member, and they would just we would have a public conversation, or they would just retweet me. I'll tell another story. When I was in Nevada, this was at the state legislative level, but I think it still applies here because Nevada is a small state. There was a bill that we were trying to get approved, and the deadline was kind of approaching, and I was contacted by a reporter who told me that they weren't planning on voting on the bill before the deadline at midnight. And I really quickly organized and mobilized students from all across the state of Nevada to tweet at their elected officials and tell them to vote on a specific bill. It was Senate Bill 464. I'll never forget it. And it got enough attention that they actually brought it to a vote, and it was approved before midnight and signed into law. And so I always tell that story because I think it's really telling of like how much of a difference social media can actually make, especially in the moment, especially at the state and local level. It really can make all the difference when rubber hits the road. So, encourage you to, again, follow them on social media, subscribe to their e-newsletters, participate in those online conversations, and so on. Discover their committee assignments. This should be pretty easy to figure out through quick Google searches, but city councils and county councils will have committees that oversee various areas of policy, ranging from health and human services to education to economic development. So just doing that little bit of research and discovery is going to help you to identify who you should be meeting with. A good way of approaching this is you probably want to have relationships or approach everyone who's on your city or town council's education committee. That probably, that makes sense. Parks and Recreation is another probably area where it makes sense to build relationships with folks on that committee. So just doing that little bit of research can tell you who some of those key folks are as well. And then tracking what they discuss at council meetings. You don't have to watch every meeting of city or town council meetings, although, they could be a hoot from time to time. There's always some fun things that happen at the hyper-local level, and they're almost always required to have time for public comment as well. So you see the public coming in and talking about things in their community that are impacting them. But just finding a way to stay on top of it. So whether that's like tracking local media, that they'll oftentimes write summaries of what's happening, or just like following along in the minutes that are posted after the meetings, which are always going to be posted on your city or town council or county council websites. Just scanning through that is going to help you to really understand what the priorities are of the individuals, of the council as a whole, and kind of where they stand. All right, that's that. And we'll go to our last tip here, which is to identify opportunities to speak and provide input and to act on those. So these are some of the more specific tips, I think, that can be helpful for you in your efforts. So first of all, as I mentioned before, local officials are always going to be really responsive to in-person advocacy. Because you are literally community members. You are in their community. You are neighbors. They're going to be responsive to you. They're nervous about you losing your vote. I promise you. So you can always just contact your council member's office and ask to meet with them and or their staff if they have them. They will likely carve out time when they're not, super busy with whatever legislative session that they're in to meet with you and have coffee and talk about whatever you want to talk about. But it doesn't just start with that initial conversation. You want to stay in touch on an ongoing basis. offer yourself as a resource. I always think it's a smart best practice to add council members to whatever email communications that you have going out, whatever newsletters that you have. Or if you just want to say, we just came up with this really cool program, just wanted to make you aware of it. I think one of the best tips that I always got, that I got as a lobbyist when I started lobbying, was that, even if they ignore you, just checking in with them on like a quarterly basis without like annoying them too much is going to keep them in your mind whenever an opportunity comes their way. And so, if they all of a sudden see a pocket of funding that's available for mentoring programs, if they see something about National Mentoring Month, you want them to think of you and to contact you. And so continuing to check in with them on a regular basis is gonna force them to think about you when the time comes. Consider volunteering on a county or city board or commission. There are lots of opportunities for volunteer participation on these different boards at your local level. These folks actually oftentimes have a lot of decision-making power. Their city councils, elected officials are listening to them. And so this not only provides a way for you to have a voice within the decisions that are being made within your community, but also, allows you to be a more visible advocate. And so someone, if they're seeing you on a more regular basis at City Hall, then they're going to continue to think about you and want to build a relationship with you as a community influencer, if nothing else. So just consider those opportunities as well. Constituent outreach offices are always a really good place to start, especially for mayors. Mayors oftentimes will have offices who are dedicated solely to connecting residents with services within your city or within your county or your community. And so if you're trying to get in touch with the mayor's office, that is oftentimes a really good place to start. And again, at the city council or county council level, there are always be lots of opportunities for town halls, lots of public hearings, lots of opportunities for you to engage with these elected officials in person and physically. So just stay aware of those opportunities. You can hear about them in those newsletters that I mentioned before. Stay on top of those things, because those are really golden opportunities for you to build those relationships and to advocate for what you're advocating for. And then the last piece I just wanted to add here is that media engagement can make a really, really big difference at the local level. You can imagine if you are writing an op-ed to your local paper right around election time, that is not so glowing, I guess, of a city council member. They could be real nervous that a lot of community members will see that message, and then all of a sudden the 10 votes that they win by in their community go the opposite direction. And so all this is to say is that doing things like op-eds in your local paper can make a really, really big difference. Even if you're just talking about the impact of mentoring in your community, clipping those news articles and sending them to elected officials in your community can be really, really helpful. Praising them for what they've done. If they are running a mentoring recruitment campaign, if they have done a lot for mentoring in your community, thank them for that on social media and through, the newspaper, through op-eds, things like that. But you can also remind them of the promises they made and do so in public. That is a way that you apply pressure to elected officials to get them to do what you want them to do. So that is that. And we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about how your local government can support you and some campaigns that you can participate in today. And then I'm going to turn it over to you all for questions. So first, just want to talk about some common asks of local officials from mentoring programs. First of all, obviously at the hyperlocal level, for mentoring programs from your perspective, it's all about building these relationships with folks who can help get your program out there. And so we have seen time and time again, one of the best ways for local governments, for mayor's offices, for city council folks to help you and support you is through volunteer recruitment. So these folks are so well connected in their community and have such strong connections, broadly within their community, that they can really help you if you're facing a mentoring, volunteer shortage and so on. And so those are really, low risk, high reward, I think, ways that elected officials in your local community can help you. Paid volunteer policies, again, kind of in line with the volunteer stuff. We always encourage our mayors for mentoring, which I'll talk about, to have paid volunteer policies for their city employees. So if they set aside like 4 hours a month or something like that for their employees to go and mentor young people, that's a policy that they can choose to put in place for their employees. That would obviously help to address any mentor recruitment gap that you have within your community. So off the bat, volunteer recruitment, really easy way that they can help you. Program elevation is another way. I've already mentioned, promoting programs and things like that through things like e-newsletters. But another way that we always encourage folks to participate is through, we have the Mentoring Connector. If you're not familiar with it at the national level, it is the largest database of mentoring programs across the country. Anyone can go in there and identify mentoring programs within their community and get connected with them and either become a mentor or, get their youth involved within the program. And so, just having a space on the local government website that talks about youth mentoring, maybe has a mentoring connector widget on their website where they can go in, type in their information, find the programs in their community. Really great way for your local government to help support and elevate your program and the great work that you're leading in your community. Participating in site visits and special ceremonies, always a great thing too. If you're having an end of school year celebration for, your students, and you want to invite the mayor to come to that, or a city council person within your, ward or region to come to that and hand out awards. Always a really great way and mutually beneficial too, because not only do you have a community leader at your events, but from the community leader's perspective, they're getting out in the community, right? They're being more visible, and people sort of correlate the visibility with doing a good job as well. And so I think that elected officials at the local level are always really, really interested in site visits or participating in ceremonies like that. And then funding and money. And, look, I will just say in general that I think that funding oftentimes at the local level, especially at the city or county level, is going to be a little bit more limited. And the reason why is just the vast majority of that money is coming from property taxes, and the vast majority of services that money is going to are things like police department, emergency management, health department, yada, yada, economic development, and so on. That's not to say that there is an opportunity there, because there is. And I actually think that the best opportunity oftentimes come from the money that is funneled down from the federal or the state government. A lot of times the federal government, I'll just give an example. The American Rescue Plan was passed a couple of years ago. It was this massive investment of trillions of dollars into communities across the country for things like education and health and so on. And what happens a lot of times, people don't realize this, is that the federal government will pass a big bill like that where a lot of money is going out to communities, and that money is actually doled out by your local government. And so the local government will get a piece of the funding either from the state government or directly from the federal government, and then decide on where that money is going to be spent within your local community. And so they're actually, in the American Rescue Plan that I just talked about, which was like the post-COVID big bill that was passed, about 5% of that funding was actually required to go to before and after school programs. And so that money was still doled out, though, by local communities, by local governments. And so all this goes to show you is that by building relationships with those council members, with the mayor's office, they're going to help you to identify those opportunities and send them your way when they come. And so they might not be here right now, but they could come in the future. And that's why you want to have those strong relationships. All right, what can you do today? So it's National Mentoring Month. Happy National Mentoring Month. I should have started with that. We, this year, for the first time in Mentor National, put together the state and local public official toolkit. The audience is for state and local public officials, so you can take this toolkit and send it directly to your mayor's office, your city council folk, even your state officials if you want to. And it contains, and I'll pull it up in a second, but it contains a number of different ways that they can plug in during National Mentoring Month. This year, for the first time, we're doing a pledge to support public funding for mentoring. And so they can choose to sign this pledge. It's non-binding or anything like that, but it's really, for us, it's helping us to identify who some of those champions are at the state and local level for youth mentoring, so that we can further connect advocates on the ground with those elected officials to make some good things happen for young people. So there's a pledge there. There is a proclamation or resolution template. Mayors have the ability to make proclamations. It's one of the I think exciting things that they get to do. So they can proclaim National Mentoring Month within your city or county. Similarly, your city or town or county council can pass a resolution recognizing National Mentoring Month or Washington Mentoring Month, whatever you want that to look like, and recognizing the value of mentoring or volunteers for mentoring within your community. And so, we make it really easy for folks within this toolkit, providing templates and so on. We also provide templates for folks to make public statements. So if there's just, the mayor or the elected official, the county council person wants to make a public statement during their next, public meeting, we provide templates for them to do that. There's always video of these meetings as well. And so it makes it really easy for you to make like a quick, cut video of them making that kind of a statement and to publicly post it. Thank them for making that statement. And that helps, again, you to further, not only to further build that relationship, but also to, thank the mentors and the folks in your community that are supporting your program, and to kind of add value to it, right? Like having community leaders speak to the important work that you're leading only enhances, I think, the reach of your program. And then Mentor runs a program called Mayors for Mentoring. It's really just a way for us to recognize mayors leading really great work across the country. We have a map that I'll show you. I'll just pull it up now. I'm going to stop sharing here, and I'm going to share my screen again. So 1 second. I have so many tabs open right now. It's embarrassing. Don't judge me, but this is our Mayors for Mentoring page. It's mentoring.org/mayors for mentoring. So if you scroll down here, it tells you a little bit about the initiative, our legacy Mayors for Mentoring. So past mayors. We don't have any from Washington, so I'm just saying could be a good initial step. And the reason why we do this campaign is not only to highlight some of the great work that some of the mayors across the country are leading, but it's also a really great opportunity for you to build that relationship. And what happens is that you fill out this form that is linked here, you send it to us, and then we turn that form around. We write a paragraph about them, add it to our website, and we send you a certificate that you can then send on to the mayor and present to them as a thank you for the great work that they're leading within your community. We have some specific goals and criteria that we ask for the mayors as well. And then we always, encourage mayors to participate during National Mentoring Month and encourage them to do paid volunteer leave policy as well. Again, helping to address and uplift the potential volunteer mentors within your community. And then one other thing I'm going to show you really quick before I turn it over to you for questions is just this toolkit, because I'm really excited and proud of it. I told you we try to make it really easy for you. Let's see if I can, there we go. I'm zooming in here. So this is the toolkit itself. There's links to the pledges I mentioned here. There are templates to the resolution and proclamation, templates to sample social media and a sample speech that they can post. They can use the mentoring connector to visit a program in their community during National Mentoring Month, extend paid time to mentor, they can partner on recruitment, and so on. I would encourage you as an initial first step just to send this link to your local officials in your community and encourage them to participate. It's a really easy ask, and I think that is something most likely that they'll want to participate in to uplift the great work that you're doing.